In this video, we're going to talk about how cities benefit from teams coming to their city to play, as well as new facilities. So, without public support, most contemporary facilities would fail to cover their costs of construction and operation. So, from the point of view of the profitability, cities do end up spending too much on stadium, but the goal of governments is not necessarily to make a profit. Okay? So again, when cities invest in these new stadiums, they often don't get the return back to cover what they actually paid or what it's costing them to fund that stadium. But again, that's not the main concern of politicians a lot of times. Markets sometimes do fail to provide socially desirable amounts of a good or service, but then the government can lead to improved outcomes. Market failure is when the market does not achieve a socially optimal level of output. Now, market failure can occur for a couple of reasons. We're going to focus on market failure that's caused by externalities. An externality is some cost or benefit to a third party that is not directly involved in the economic transaction. The presence of a new team or facility does bring large benefits that are not captured by the private sector. The local government can prevent market failure and improve economic well-being by providing subsidies. So basically, if there are positive externalities, which is a benefit to a third party or an unintended party, if there are positive externalities, then the government providing these subsidies for these stadiums can help to improve the efficiency. Now, there are, however, negative externalities when it comes to these. Now, a negative externality is a cost to a third party that is not directly involved in the transaction. So if the project generates only private costs and benefits, then that individual firm, business entity, whatever it is, can decide, do a cost-benefit analysis and figure it out. However, if externalities are involved, the private parties may not be able to make decisions that are best for society as a whole. Now, one of the rationale for public funding of a stadium or arena rests in the belief that the private benefits of hosting a sports franchise do not outweigh the private costs, but the private benefits plus the positive externalities of these franchises do outweigh the private costs plus negative externalities. And if that's the case, the subsidy will ensure that the social well-being is maximized. So, for example, a Chicago Cubs game. Let's talk about the private versus the external benefits. In addition to whatever the direct costs and benefits to Cubs to convey to the residents of Chicago, they also create both positive and negative externalities each time there's a game. The positive externalities would be from local restaurants, seeing increases in their customers coming in around them. Sports bars benefit as well. And then there's also the non-monetary side of cities coming together, a sense of pride, so forth. But on the other side of that, when you have the negative externalities, you have more traffic around that area. You can have a lot of times, sometimes more crime if there is a lot of residential around where the parking is, so forth. So when it comes to constructing even the simplest major facilities, it can produce hundreds of millions of dollars in spending and income. Once that facility is built, the fans spend tens of millions of dollars to attend and enjoy the games. Now, from the standpoint of the team, the story ends there. But the cities, however, have more of a broader perspective. So, for example, in 2014, the Chicago Cubs began a 5-year, $575 million renovation of Wrigley Field and the surrounding areas. From an economic standpoint, the important questions are how much impact do the Cubs have on the Chicago economy, and what will the impact of the refurbished stadiums be? The direct benefits of the Cubs to Chicago is the increased new spending that is attributable to the team and the stadium renovations. So those direct benefits are going to be, you have more people coming and they're spending more money there. Right? On top of that, for example, the construction phase. During the construction phase, you have jobs that are being created. Now, these jobs, it may be a little bit overstated because, let's say, for example, you have a chunk of people that work construction jobs working on the stadium. Well, those aren't necessarily all new jobs because they may have otherwise been working on other construction projects. But these construction firms now cannot take them on because they are working on the stadium. So it is there, but that is a little bit of a problem with it. Now, a longer-term direct impact comes from the additional money that the Cubs fans, in this example, will spend at the newly renovated ballpark and its surroundings. Now, businesses and households that have nothing to do with the facility, however, or the team that occupies it, could also benefit because of people going to their establishments, to their restaurants, to their bars, so forth. On top of that, when you look at the direct benefits, you also have things like people who work directly at the stadiums. That's jobs that are being created for those for the games. So those are kind of the direct benefits. If you look at the indirect benefits, so you have what is called the multiplier effect, and when you have some of the indirect benefits from the money spent at Cubs games stems from the higher incomes of people who work at or near the games. Now, what happens is their higher incomes leads to added spending elsewhere in Chicago and other cities. And so what you have is, for example, you have people from outside the city, they're coming in, they're bringing their money into the city for these games, and then that's giving more money to the people who work there, the people who work around there, and then these people now have more money, the business owners, the employees, whatever, can now spend that money in other places within the city. And so it's kind of a second level. All right, so that's more money being spent away from the stadiums. And then these businesses that the additional money is being spent at, all right, those employees now have more money, which can be spent elsewhere, and so on and so forth. Okay, it's called a multiplier effect. Now, most studies of the economic impact analyze an increase in the well-being, such as per capita income, so forth, and it's been a little bit mixed, but in general, there hasn't been strong evidence that a city has become better overall, specifically because of a stadium. So let's talk about public choice for a second. So even if new facilities are losing propositions, meaning the government knows they're not going to come out ahead on it, cities might still pursue them. And this could be because of specific interest groups, specifically in the construction industry, the hospitality industries, the restaurant industries. They have a lot of influence. And a lot of times these groups have a disproportionate influence over the city's politicians, which can really help to push something forward. And so if you have a group of local business owners really pushing hard for it, and these business owners have a lot of sway with the local politicians, these politicians could be kind of pushed into agreeing to do the stadium, even if it's not an economically smart thing to do. So let's talk about public choice theory for a second. Public choice theory relies on the idea that the decision makers in the public sector do not automatically act to resolve market failures of public goods and externalities. This can be because of kind of the political aspect, where they're constantly running for office and they need to make decisions that are popular and not necessarily smart. And so that is a problem. Now, something else to talk about is what's called log rolling. We talked about the interest groups, the construction interest groups, the local business owners. Now, by expressing the intensity of their desires, what they want, these groups may, through the process what is known as log rolling, induce politicians to pass legislation that majority rule would deny. Meaning that if it would have gone up to a vote, it likely would be turned down, but because it's the politician making the decision, they may be able to be pushed into that. Okay. And so when you basically, what it all comes down to is, you have the cost-benefit analysis, which does play a role in it when cities decide if they're going to benefit or not, and if it's worth investing in these stadiums. But it's not always the case where the best decisions will be made. And a lot of time the pressure will force these governments to pay for the stadiums, even if they don't actually believe they will get the benefits of it. Right. Now, when it comes to whether new sports stadiums, arenas are worth it, the location is a big thing. All right, so with real estate they say location, location, location. That's the case a lot of times with the success of the stadiums. And so a lot of times the success of the stadiums will depend on where that stadium actually is. And so what you have seen is a lot of mixed results on how much additional money these stadiums have. And so older ballparks, football stadiums were built on the edges of town. Right? These are areas that people have to drive to. There's not much around. It's basically just the stadiums. And with that, the benefits tend to be a lot less, because you're not going to have people drive to some suburban area to go to the game and then drive into the city to go to the restaurant. Now, what has happened is, as these older facilities, these older, especially baseball parks, have begun to decay, the owners decided to move from the outskirts of town and the suburbs into the main cities. And this was a much bigger it was an easier sell for the owners to make, to get the local governments to pay for it, because what was happening was they would say, look, we're now not sending people all the way out to the outskirts over here. We're actually going to be bringing them right into your city where you already have all these benefits. And so now you're seeing a lot more in more of the downtown areas. For example, in Buffalo, the Buffalo Sabres a few years ago built a new stadium in downtown Buffalo. And what you've seen there is, around that stadium, there's been a lot of investment into different restaurants and bars and other entertainment. And so the city of Buffalo has benefited greatly from this. Whereas, for example, Arizona, which the Arizona Cardinals football relatively recently built a new stadium, it's kind of on the outskirts of Phoenix and Scottsdale, and with that, they're not going to get those same benefits because people are going to be driving from all over, but they're not driving into the city. They're actually just driving to this kind of middle of nowhere area to go to the game. So the overall theme with this when it comes to the benefits is, cities do benefit from the teams and the new stadiums, but the problem is a lot of times those benefits end up getting overstated, and the local governments don't always make the best decisions or most economical decisions, and end up financing more for stadiums than they actually receive in return in terms of the benefits of them.